Welcome to SBME Interfaces. Our goal with this show is to introduce you to the people that interface with biomedical engineering, from students and faculty to staff and industry, and everyone in between. BME is a broad field that encompasses so many different perspectives, journeys, skill sets, and backgrounds, and we are excited to share them all with you.
So we're very excited today to have Dr. Santa Ono here. We'll be interfacing with him on today's episode. He's the 15th President and Vice-Chancellor of UBC. He's the chair of U15 Group of Universities, sits on the Board of Directors of Universities Canada, and is the past chair of Research Universities of British Columbia. He's also had extensive experience at different academic institutions, both as a faculty member and in different service roles. He's a molecular immunologist by training out of University of Chicago and then McGill. I'm not sure if he finds any time now to do any research, but I know from time to time he's submitted grants, as I've heard, which is fantastic that he still has time for that. He's taught at Johns Hopkins, Harvard, and University College in London. He speaks openly on mental health and is a champion of that area. And he's been inducted into numerous organizations, including Fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and the Canadian Academy of Health Sciences. Again, welcome, Santa.
Thank you very much.
So I wanted to start sort of in the obvious. I start with every guest this way. So this past year has been unlike any in recent world memory. And it's the kind of year that tests those in leadership. So I was wondering, like, what are some of the biggest challenges and surprises that you have encountered over the past 12 months as president of UBC?
Well, this is the first major pandemic in quite some time, since I think 1918. So it's not an exaggeration to say that how to manage this from a UBC perspective, from a BC perspective, a Canadian perspective, and a global perspective, that there is no playbook on how to transition entire universities, the society really in general, to remote work. And so that's the reality of the situation. UBC was in a better place than many in that we had gone through some theoretical exercises on what to do in similar kinds of crisis situations. So we had been going through this for a couple of years, so we knew how to come together as a set of leaders at UBC, how to connect with the public health authorities and government ministries. And so UBC was, I think, in better shape than most institutions, since we had actually thought it through. And I think that's one of the reasons why I think that UBC is recognized as having dealt with it better than most. But to answer your question, when it's one thing to think through something as a hypothetical, it's another thing to actually manage the transition for, as you know, UBC is a community of over 80,000 people. If you consider all of the students and faculty and staff on 2 campuses. So it's one of the largest employers in British Columbia, either number 2 or number 3. And so there are a lot of logistical issues and challenges that you don't really understand all of those issues until you're actually in this kind of a situation. So I'm very proud of how UBC has fared. I would say that I have the opportunity to speak with university presidents across Canada and around the world. And I would say that we're probably in the top 2 to 5% of institutions in terms of how we've handled it, in terms of logistics of transitioning all of these courses to remote instruction. The number of cases that we've had on a very large campus. I was just looking this morning, universities with say 9,000 students in the US, some of them have 1,500 cases. Universities our size, some of them have 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 cases. And you can count the number of cases across British Columbia. I think the total number relatively recently was under 50. So with UBC being the largest university by far in the province, there are very few compared to most institutions globally. So I think that's something that we should be proud of as an institution. And as you know, we're not fully remote. We have entire programs that are face-to-face in certain degrees, such as film and theater, and music. And even with that level of activity, and as you know, we have about now 48% occupancy in all of our halls of residence. And the first year residence, Orchard Commons, as you know, is full. And so to be able to manage that with very few cases is really a tribute to the planning, but also the implementation of the staff and the faculty of the university. So my response is in this very unusual time, I'm very proud of how UBC really navigated a challenging situation.
Great. And I would say it was very refreshing to have a calming voice in you, Santa, and sort of you integrating music into your messaging early on in the pandemic. And I think that also went a long way. So thank you for that. So what motivated you to join UBC?
Well, I was very happy. I was the 28th president of the University of Cincinnati. I had been there for 6 years. And the story is that I was giving a talk at, of all events, the annual meeting of the American Marketing Association. And I was there giving a major talk in front of thousands of people in a very large room. And at the very end of my talk, somebody stood up, and somebody brought a mic to her and she said, "We're looking for a president at UBC, and you're exactly what we need." And so it was very embarrassing. Here I was in front of thousands of people, and I was asked, essentially, would you be interested in coming to UBC? And so that's how it happened. Soon thereafter, I think I answered by saying, I love Vancouver, I love UBC. And I said something like, my father was actually a professor at UBC. And I was actually born and lived on this Point Grey campus. The house I lived in is still here. If you look near the McDonald's, that area, there is a road called President's Row. And I actually lived in a townhouse in President's Row when my parents lived there. And interestingly, just kitty corner to our house was a very famous author called Joy Kogawa, who lived across the street from where we were living. And so I mentioned in my response that we have a connection to UBC, and as soon thereafter, I got a phone call, and they said, "We'd like to talk to you about the presidency of UBC." I ultimately spoke to the search committee, and then they said, "We'd love you to be the next president of UBC." So that's how it happened. I wasn't looking for the job. I was very happy as the president of another institution, but UBC is a very, very special place for myself and my family. I learned to ride my bicycle on Main Mall. So that's what happened.
That's great.
That might be the most unique story I've ever heard of a president of any organization getting their position. That's really cool.
Thanks.
So for you in a presidential role of leadership, you've likely had to curtail at least some of your research endeavors. So has that been hard for you to minimize that, and especially as you move more and more into administration?
Well, it's something that's been happening. I was president of the University of Cincinnati. I was there for 6 years, but I was also provost, and I was a senior vice provost at Emory University in Atlanta before that. So I've really been in very challenging, demanding administrative roles for over 15 years. And so it's impossible to be a full-time researcher and to have those kinds of responsibilities. So I haven't been as productive as I used to be. When I was focusing just on science, I had at my peak 15 to 20 people in my lab. Now I have 2, because it's not fair to have graduate students and postdocs if you're rarely there. So it's I wouldn't say it's something that I have done recently. I've been gradually slowing down my research activities because I have so many other demands. So to answer your question, is it hard? Of course, because I'm a scientist and I love science and I always will. But the reality is that you only have so many hours in the day, and you can't really be engaged 100% in your research when you have to run a university.
Great. Since you've done a lot of administration, this is a personal question of mine, is that do you think there's room, or should this be explored, to have people that have PhDs come in on a sort of a service or administrative tenure track route, really to build them up early on and get them into that stream, even though research and teaching are the forefronts of an academic institution and faculty members?
That's a great question. There are all kinds of backgrounds to university presidents. If you're considering being a university president, it used to be historically that you had to have risen through the ranks and become a full professor. And usually the path is after you become a full professor, you become head of a division or a department. Then you become an associate dean or a dean. You could become a vice provost and then a provost. So you could become a provost through different pathways. And then usually presidents come from pools of existing sitting presidents and people who are provosts. So that's a typical pathway. But things are changing over the past 5 to 10 years, where there are more individuals that are chosen for administrative strengths. There are some atypical presidents that were leaders of institutions or politicians, and they come in, and some of them don't do well, some of them do perfectly well. So the path to higher administration is diversifying as we speak. There are, just today, my alma mater, the University of Chicago, announced its new president. And that individual is a pretty traditional route where he was not only a distinguished scientist, but he ran a federal lab. That's a little bit unusual. But then he went from there to be the provost of Berkeley, and now he's president of University of Chicago. So that's not 100% traditional, because there was sort of a segue into running a federal lab, but that experience certainly was something that's going to prepare him well to be president of the University of Chicago, because it has federal labs such as the Argonne Lab and Fermi National Lab. So, but there are other examples, usually not major research universities, where you can even go through a path where you're in student affairs, and then you become a vice president of students like Ainsley Carey. He has a PhD, he teaches, but he's not what you would consider 100% of research active faculty. But someone like Ainsley could be a candidate for presidency of a certain kind of institution. So things are diversifying. There are major public universities in the US who have tapped former governors of states to run institutions. And in some cases they do well. In some cases they don't understand an academic institution and they get into trouble. So, but there's no, clear rule that if you haven't been in a university, you can't succeed, even though that's the traditional path. There are individuals who are quick learners and can take their leadership, organizational abilities that are from, say, a company or from running a state. Some of them are able to learn very quickly and to build a team that understands a university, and they're able to succeed.
With all those demands of being a leader, including everything from political aspects and all of that from all sides, what prompted you to seek a second term as UBC president?
Well, it's actually a little bit unusual, because it used to be, if you look at the history of UBC presidents, some of them, for example, Norman Mackenzie or David Strangway, would stay for 15, 20, or 20 plus years. But if you actually look at presidencies now, it's rare for individuals to remain president for more than 5 years. So the average length of tenure is decreasing. And part of it, people feel, is because the demands on the job are much greater than 20, 30 years ago. There was a time when almost all of the budget of an institution came from a provincial grant. And if you look over the past 20 years, the proportion of the university budget that comes from a provincial grant has been decreasing steadily, which requires that the president of the institution find resources from many other places. One of the main ways that a president keeps the institution running is to spend a good bit of time interacting with foundations and high net worth individuals to sort of fill that gap. Because if you have a decreasing flow of funds from the traditional source, you have to fill them in with research grants, or you have to fill them in with philanthropy. So it's very tiring. It's a 24/7 job. And so I think people only have so much energy to inject into running an institution. And for that reason, I think more and more people are just serving one term. So to answer your question, why would I sign up for a second term? It's because I love UBC, and you know, you can make an impact in 5 years, but you can make an even greater impact in 7, 8, 9, 10 years. If you look at the more recent presidents at UBC, you probably know that Martha Piper, who the fountain in the middle of campus is named after, served almost a full 2 terms. I think it was about 8.5, 9 years. And then Stephen too served about 8 years. He announced in his 7th year that he wanted to go back to his research. And so you can see that it's getting shorter and shorter and shorter. But to answer your question, I think that you know, my work's not done yet. There are some very significant things that we're trying to do that I've started. We declared a climate emergency. We have a task force, and we have a set of things that we want to do as an institution. I'd like to see us actually make progress towards those commitments. As you know, last summer, I said that we had to address systemic racism that exists in every university, that exists in every jurisdiction. That takes time. That kind of change usually can't be accomplished in 5 years. We've just begun. So I'd like to make sure that it's got momentum. I think having continuity in leadership is essential to really make progress towards those kinds of things that I honestly think the university needs to address and society needs to address.
Absolutely.
So you were here when the School of Biomedical Engineering was established, almost 4 years now. And so how do you think the school has been doing thus far? And what do you think long-term its place can be both at UBC and in the broader ecosystem?
Well, I'd say it was one of the first things I worked on when I arrived. I give a lot of credit to the 2 deans that were very involved, Mark Parlange of Applied Science and Dermot Kelleher of Medicine. We worked together to envision this and to shepherd it through the Senate of the university, as well as the Board of Governors. So it was one of the very first things that I was engaged in as a new president. We were able to found 3 such units or schools during my first term: the School of Biomedical Engineering, but also a policy school, which is taking the Liu Institute and growing it. And then a new emeritus college. And we're actually even working on yet another as we speak that I can't announce yet. So the launching of the School of Biomedical Science Engineering is really one of the things that I'm most proud of in my first term. And I think it's doing fantastically well. You know, we worked very hard to find a visionary leader. Peter Zanstra, I think, is one of the best we could find anywhere. And it wasn't easy to recruit him from the University of Toronto. I think they're still angry at us. But he's doing a great job, as you know. He took a building and set it up pretty quickly. As you can see, he's recruiting outstanding world-class faculty, and he's not done yet. And we're working intensively with him to build a new building. And all of that will happen. So I would say to do all that, to recruit an outstanding leader, for him to recruit a core faculty, and to connect them with existing faculty that have interests, and to I think in the near future stand up a new state-of-the-art building is fantastic, and everyone should be proud of that. Same kind of things happening with the policy school. We recruited an outstanding director to the policy school. I spoke to her yesterday. We're talking about a new building that hopefully we can put up next to the existing Liu Institute. And it's very, very exciting what's happening there. She's world-class as well. She came from Washington, D.C. The Emeritus College stood up from, although there was a program, we actually now have a college, a place that faculty members who've given so much to the institution can call their home. It has its own leadership. It has funding for faculty members who have retired so they can continue to contribute to the institution that they have helped to build. So those are 3 major new entities that stood up in my first term. And I think in my second term, we're going to hopefully cut a ribbon and you can all go into a brand new building.
Looking
That's
forward.
what we're hoping for. Absolutely. So now I want to move on to something that I think is really, really important for everybody, for leadership, and especially at times like these. So you are a passionate advocate for mental health. You speak publicly about it, including your own journey. This is pretty rare in senior leadership, but also very welcome. And so where do you think, like what made you want to step forward? And where do you think we could be, where do you think we could be doing more to address mental health, especially at a post-secondary institution?
Well, the reason why I spoke about my own personal lived experience, which, as you know, I have had but fully recovered from my own mental health issues. It was a very hard journey for me. And so the reason why I spoke about it was twofold. First of all, I have to acknowledge that I'm in a very secure place. I've been a tenured professor for decades. And so, as you know, when you have tenure, essentially you have a job until you retire. And so if a person in that position can't speak up, who can? And that's the reason why you have tenure, is to give that individual freedom, academic freedom, to talk about things that are important and hopefully will contribute to their field or to society. And so that's why there's tenure. And so if you don't take advantage of that security, then in a way, you're misusing that freedom that has been granted to you by an institution. So that's the first thing I like to say. The second thing I like to say is that talking about mental health has to happen in the context of a university. Why? Well, I'll first talk about what happened when I spoke about my lived experience. There was a student at the University of Cincinnati who had gone missing. And for about 11 days, there was a massive citywide effort to try to locate this missing student. His name is Brogan Dully, and I've become friends with his family. A much loved student. And there were CCTV videos of him late at night walking, and people looked all over the city to try to find this student. Unfortunately, on the 11th day, I received a phone call somewhere like 11 or 11:30 at night from the police chief in the city, who had said that they had located him and he had taken his own life. And you know, one of the worst things that you have to do as president of university is to actually preside over a memorial service or go to the funeral of a student, because we're here to see young people thrive and to move up in their personal development to different kinds of careers. And so it's really sad to see a promising life cut short, and to be there with their parents. But nevertheless, it happened. It was national news in the US because people were following what was happening in the search for the student. It was hard to be with the students. It affects the entire university when something like that happens. And so what happened was that several months, I think, after that occurred, I was asked to speak at a fundraiser for mental health. I had talked to some individuals about my life, but never openly about my own challenges. Before I was to speak at this fundraiser, a young student stood up about losing her friend to mental health challenges and to suicide. And I was so touched by her bravery in talking about her friend and her situation that I didn't think about it. I just said, well, if she's going to talk about it, and she's going to talk about the fact that the only way to break the stigma about talking about the fact that this is a real situation that affects 1 in 4, 1 in 3 students, the only way to break that stigma is for people like me to talk about it. And so I spoke about it. And I was surprised, but I suppose I was the president of a major American university, it became international news. Because as you say, very few, if any, university presidents ever talk about their mental health or the fact that they had contemplated suicide or attempted suicide in my case. But I was actually, after I talked about it, there was a moment where I said, oh my goodness, I wonder if the Board of Governors will say you're not the right person. Because the reason why people don't speak about it is because they don't want to appear weak. And they're afraid of the consequences about talking about the fact that they have gone through difficult experiences. The reality of the matter is that many people, suffer from mental health challenges. It's not abnormal. There's no reason to be ashamed of it. There's no reason not to talk about it. And so, quite to my pleasant surprise, the Board of Trustees of University of Cincinnati, 100% of them supported me. And the reaction from the world really was very supportive, and resulted in a lot of people being mobilized to work together to address the real problem of the mental health of students in our universities, in our schools. And so it turned out okay. And that's why, to answer your question, a very long-winded answer, why I spoke out. And I'm very happy I did.
That's great. And I think showing one's vulnerability is one of the true signs of a leader. So I think more leaders need to come to terms with that. So we know you have limited time with you, so we want to shift gears a little bit from that. You're active on social media, Twitter and Instagram. Focus on Instagram because that's my favorite platform. And you put a lot of photography there. So what drew you to Instagram, and what drew you to your passion of photography?
It's an interesting story. I was not comfortable on social media until when I was the senior vice provost at Emory University. Student leaders said, you have to be on social media. Back then it was Facebook. And I said, why? And they said, because that's how we talk to each other. That's how we learn about events. And if you really want to connect with students, you need to be on Facebook. So it began with Facebook. When I became provost and then president at the University of Cincinnati, it was still a relatively new thing. There was a Vancouver startup company called Hootsuite that you may have heard of. And they heard about it in Cincinnati, and they said, there's a way that you can actually communicate through multiple platforms with one program, Hootsuite. And so I used Hootsuite when it was very new to communicate not just on Facebook, but also on Twitter, and ultimately on Instagram and LinkedIn. And so I began when Facebook was relatively new and was an early adopter of communicating with not only the university community, but outside of the community through social media. There's some vulnerabilities by doing that. If people are upset at you, they'll tag you or they'll reply in a sarcastic way. All those things happen. But the positive aspect is that you can communicate with tens of thousands of people. And you can also hear what their concerns are as well. So for me, it's a mechanism to communicate very quickly with many, many people simultaneously. Now, Instagram was relatively late in the platforms that I use, but I love it because I'm an amateur photographer, and my initial Instagram posts are of terrible quality, and the students criticize me and they say, if you're going to put a picture up, it has to be of high quality. So it really pushed me to up my game in photography, and so some of my photographs are of that quality, and some of them are videos, some of them, as you know, are pictures of food, and it's just a way of, hopefully being real. People know more about me than students know about many other presidents, and it's also fun.
Great.
On the subject of food, I just want to ask a quick question. Are there any hidden gems, any favorite spots in Vancouver that you really love that people need to know about?
Well, there are so many restaurants in Vancouver that we're spoiled. I'm married to, my wife's name is Wendy Yip, and she's originally, her parents are from Hong Kong. And so they've really opened up my eyes to the diversity of cuisine that comes from Hong Kong and Taiwan and China. So if you like Chinese food, there's no better place to be, and maybe even better in Hong Kong than being here in Metro Vancouver. You can just go to Richmond, and there are hundreds of restaurants. And so to answer your question of all the different kinds of cuisine in Vancouver, we are spoiled. I do like the food in Richmond.
Miguel, why don't you lead us to the end now?
Sure. Okay. So last question. Thank you again for your time. So obviously there are tons of initiatives and projects and stuff you've got going on right now, but is there one that's really getting you excited and that you think we all should be excited about too?
Well, you know, there's all kinds of things I could talk about. I could talk about the anti-racism work that we're in the midst of, but because of the home base of this podcast, I'd say what I'm most excited about is the President's Academic Excellence Initiative, or Academic Renewal. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it was an investment that the entire university is making, and it's quite bold. You probably know, because of the pandemic, because of the economy, if you look at Alberta, they're cutting back in a major way. UBC is kind of unusually and unique in this time in that we are investing heavily in the academics of the institution. And we're doing that because that's the core of what we do as a university. So as you can see in your school, we're hiring lots of faculty members. I mean, that's happening in your school. Actually, that's happening across both campuses. It's bold. It should make us an even better institution. But that initiative is not just about hiring research faculty, and you can see that happening. It's also about investing in our graduate students. During my first term, as you know, we actually increased the minimum stipend that a graduate student can make. And we want to do even more. We've accelerated increasing the graduate stipend just recently in this past year. And so what I'm excited about is that we recognize as a university that strengthening the institution requires investments not only in faculty, but also in graduate students. And one of the things I hope that we do in the next year or so is to really look at postdoctoral fellows. You know, the postdoctoral fellows are critical for large laboratories especially, and we could have more postdoctoral fellows at UBC. And in doing all of this, I think that we can also address the anti-racism initiative in ensuring that when we hire faculty and we hire graduate students and we hire postdocs, that we make sure that we're casting a wide net and attracting to the institution the best people, regardless of the color of their skin.
Absolutely.
That's great. Once again, thank you, Santa, for doing this. I know you're extremely busy, but it was insightful to talk to you. I've had the pleasure of coming to one of your breakfasts that you host the staff and faculty before the pandemic. So it was nice chatting there with you and Wendy and seeing one of your dogs. I don't know if you have more than one, but
only one dog.
And I do live on campus, so from time to time I see you and Wendy and your daughters sometimes walking. So it's great that you get out and walk about. And thank you again, and hope to see more great things from you in your second term.
Thank you so much, and I really appreciate the time for this conversation. All the best to you.
Thank you.